AP History students. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast, where you will learn everything you need to know about taking AP History classes from skills to content, from historical thinking skills to themes in history. Whether you are taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP US History, or AP European History, this podcast is for you. Be sure to check out the episode list and show notes to find the topics that you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where I am happy to answer your questions. There are certain themes or skills that you probably get sick of hearing about, but if you can master their meaning and how to use them when you engage with the content, you'll be in a much better position to ace the exam. That's our goal here, right? To ace the exam. Well, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to cover the 3 reasoning processes. In this episode, we'll talk continuity and change. Next episode will be causation, and then the third will be comparison. But before we get too far along, if you haven't already done so, make sure that you go back and listen to some of those episodes, especially the ones that I'm about to say are similar or exactly like how to earn the points on the LEQ. I say it each episode, but I'll say it again. They're all on demand for your listening pleasure. And the episode that will be released on May 6th is a very special one. I'm going to talk to you about the exam. It will be part review, part last minute preparations, and part pep talk. It's the RPP, Review Prep Pep. You'll definitely want to watch or listen to it before you take your exam. Come in, students. Take your seats. It's time for some AP History Help. How are you all doing today? Everybody feeling good? Change and continuity. What does that mean to you? You know what it means to change. It means something transformed. The way it was is not the same as the way it is or will be. What about continuity? What word do you hear in there? Continuity. Right. Continue. If something continues, it goes on. It doesn't change. As we study history, we look at patterns of change and of predictability. Let's start with something that you're an expert at. Regardless of which course you take or how good or bad your AP experience has been, let's talk about you. Tell me something about you that has changed in the last 6 months. What about a year? 5 years? Since you were born? Those are changes. How about a continuity? Perhaps some physical attributes like eye or hair color. Have you always been stubborn or easygoing? Are there patterns that most humans fit into for continuities, like eye color and demeanor? We are all born. We all go through stages of life. These things are predictable and fit into the category of continuity. That's all good and wonderful, you're saying, but how does that apply to history? I can hear you talking back there. Well, historians have identified developments and processes that endure or continue over time and space. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that has existed for all of time. It could be that trade routes spread more than the goods that are traded. We see cultural diffusion, the spread of disease, the sharing of ideas. The roots have continued for centuries to do these things. But what about the changes? Well, the locations, the products exchanged, the names, the people who trade, those are all changes. I know what your next question is. Why should we care? Or more, how does this apply to my AP History class? Often your free response questions ask that you respond to the prompt that is going to require that you either compare, show cause or effect, or, change your continuity. And as we talked about last week, the analysis point of the LEQ is earned by adhering to that reasoning process that is the action of the prompt. And add to that, you can get complexity if the prompt is asking about change and you also talk about continuity. So as you're reviewing for your exam, one really good way, and maybe different, is to look for the change in continuities in each unit of study and then look across units. For example, slavery is a continuity. It has existed since BCE days, but the origins and the groups of people, as well as their treatment, have changed over time. Religions have existed in some capacity, but which religions and the role of those religions has changed. Bigger picture. Geographical challenges have existed as long as man has been in existence. Whether it's natural disasters or how to adapt, geography is probably the longest existing continuity. But what has changed? How has man adapted? The severity of natural disasters, how man has learned to travel over land and sea, many ways. I know how hard it is to keep track of all of the things you need to know in an AP history class. So I spent a good chunk of time trying to organize things in a way that you can reflect daily and see the big picture. I call it the AP History Student Success Journal, and it's available on Amazon. It is set up to be a user-friendly weekly companion on your journey to acing the AP exam. I want you to be able to focus on the important content each and every day, each week, the thinking skills that we cover in class and in your AP classroom. And most importantly, you should always take time to reflect on the overall process of what you're learning and which skills you're developing. I've put a bunch of other little tips and tricks in there to help answer a lot of questions that I think you might have. I will put the link to purchase the Student Success Planner in the show notes. But you can also access it through the aphistoryhelp.com website or head on over to Amazon and search on Success Planner for History Students AP, and it will be there at the top of the search results. And podcast listeners heard it first. The price is going up soon. The price is low right now to get them out there. Plus, it's towards the end of the school year, but the value is much more than the $14.97 price tag. I want you to have a chance to grab one before the price goes up. So run, don't walk, to that Amazon Add to Cart button. And then if you're listening to this after I raise the price, get in contact with me and I'll tell you how to get it for the original price. College Board has included this reasoning process of change and continuity in their curriculum with specific aspects as follows. First, describe patterns of continuity and or change over time. Second, explain patterns of continuity and or change over time. And last, explain the relative historical significance of specific historical developments in relation to a larger pattern of continuity and or change. Here's one more example. Even though women participated in the Renaissance, Reformation, and Scientific Revolution, these movements of intellectual and cultural change left attitude toward gender relatively unaffected, despite sparking debates over women's nature and proper role in society. Speaking of which, it's time for Wendy Teaches History. Sit back, students. It's time for a story. When it comes to the role of women in history, there isn't much continuity, mostly a lot of change. You could get creative and say that women have always done great things. The change is the recognition of their accomplishments. March is Women's History Month, and you know what? It's going to take a long time before we see women not getting the short end of the stick in history. Up until about 100 years ago, women weren't seen as valuable contributors, and quite frankly, their involvement in affairs of pretty much any type was frowned upon, if not almost taboo. Even once women got the right to vote, equality in most areas did not happen until much later. And yes, there are some places in the world that still see women as lesser than. I'm going to tell you about 4 women in history and just what they did that makes them awesome. To start, we're going to go back to the Byzantine Empire and Emperor Justinian. He married a young woman of ill repute, which means she had a bad reputation, and she proved to be his strength. If it wasn't for Theodora, Emperor Justinian would have fled Constantinople in the face of conflict and likely would have gone down in history as a coward. He was packing, about to leave town, and she basically told him if he leaves, he would go down in history as a coward. And if he stayed, he might die, but at least he'd be a hero. Spoiler alert, he doesn't die. And by the way, a shout out to my friend Frankie Ray, who wrote and sings a song called Theodora. You definitely want to check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes for you all to listen to it. Mary Wollstonecraft was born in London, England in 1759, and she was an influential writer and a passionate advocate for educational and social equality for women. Her most notable work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women from 1792, is considered a classic of feminism. In that groundbreaking work, she argued for education for both men and women. Wollstonecraft's experiences as a teacher and a governess shaped her views, which she eloquently expressed in her writings. Despite her untimely death at the age of 38, her legacy endures, and she is regarded as one of the founding feminist philosophers. And she was married to John Shelley, and their daughter was Mary Shelley, who would go on to write Frankenstein. Fun fact. Margaret Cavendish was a British writer, scientist, and aristocrat who lived in the 17th century. One might consider her a Renaissance woman, although her male contemporaries might not have thought of her as such. What made Cavendish unique was the fact that she published under her own name, which was unusual for women of that era. Because of this, she was criticized by many male philosophers and scientists of the time. Not only did she write about science, she also wrote poetry, plays, and an essay on philosophy. She also served as an assistant for Queen Maria Henrietta, wife to King Charles I of England and Scotland, while they were living in exile in France. And last is Madam C.J. Walker, born in 1867. She was an American businesswoman and philanthropist. She's in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the first female self-made millionaire in the United States. Despite a challenging upbringing, including being orphaned at a young age, she persevered and built an international beauty business that employed 25,000 active sales agents by 1919. Her success was fueled by her innovative hair care products, including the famous Walker Method or the Walker system of beauty culture. Beyond her business achievements, Madam C.J. Walker was committed to philanthropy, supporting scholarships, homes for the elderly, and anti-lynching efforts within the Black community. Thank you, ladies, and let me say, I had a hard time picking just 4. How might you encounter the reasoning processes of continuity and change over time? You know, back in the day, there was actually a CCOT essay rather than an LEQ. Now, occasionally, this pops up in an LEQ. Here's an LEQ prompt from APUSH. Evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain, analyzing what changed and what stayed the same from the period before the war to the period after it. Or the 2019 APUSH DBQ, the prompt was evaluate the extent to which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States from 1890 to 1920. And there was an SAQ on the 2018 AP World Exam where all 3 questions about the primary source asked about change. Identify one way in which the event depicted in the image reflects political changes in the global balance of power in the 18th century. Then explain one way in which the events depicted in the image reflect economic changes in Asia in the 18th century. And last, explain one significant way in which Great Britain's relationship with South Asia changed in the 19th century compared with the relationship depicted in the image. That last question, see what they did there? A little change and some comparison. AP Euro in 2021, for one of the non-stimulus-based SAQs, asked the students to describe one specific example of a change in the role of religion in European daily life during the period 1450 to 1700. Then, describe one specific example of a continuity in the role of religious European life during the period 1450 to 1700. And last, using a specific example from the period 1450 to 1700, explain how political authorities in Europe attempted to control religious beliefs or practices. The last example I'll share is from AP World in 2017. Describe and explain a significant continuity and a significant change in the global balance of political power in the period 1900 to the present. To wrap up, I'll share the thesis statement from an exemplar so you can hear how that was addressed. From 1900 to present, there have been significant changes in the world of geopolitics, but there have also been prolonged continuities of both, which have profound effects on the world as it is today. Some of the greatest continuities that have persisted into the 20th century are the Western traditions of democracy, the continued use of imperialism, and the importance of Europe to the world powers. The greatest change in geopolitics are the rise of Eastern communism, the massive influences of American, and the development of nuclear weapons. If you'd like to read the rest of that essay, let me know, and I'll send you the file. We kept it short this week. I hope you have a better handle on what change and continuity is, how to wrap your brain around its presence in history, and feel more confident in being able to answer a CCOT prompt, whether it's a DBQ, SAQ, or LEQ. Don't forget about the AP Student Success Journal. I'll link to it in the show notes, or just search for your Success Journal AP on Amazon. If you're going to take another AP history class next year, buy one now while that price is still low. Hey, by the way, I'd be so grateful if you'd tell your friends who are taking or thinking about taking AP history classes about the podcast. I'm here to help as many students as possible to be successful in the course and on the exam. That will do it for this episode. Don't forget to come to Wendy for AP History Help. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.